Morning, thank you. My name is Caroline Altman-Smith. I'm here this morning representing the Kresge Foundation. We are a private national foundation based in Detroit, and our mission is to expand opportunities for low-income people in America's cities. So we are really excited to be here with you. The work that we're going to be talking about this morning resonates very deeply with us and is very well aligned with the work of our education focus area, which is all about helping low-income students of color and first-generation students make it successfully into and through college. So thank you to all of you who got up early and braved a very chilly DC morning to be here with us in person. And to also to the folks who are joining us on the web this morning. Thanks for tuning into the webcast and for your time and attention. So within this sector, we talk all the time about the students that all of us here are trying to serve in one way or another, and what complex, excuse me, what complex lives they have. We know that students are working one or more low-wage jobs often while they're in college. They're taking care of their dependents. They've got kids, grandkids, other family members to care for. Maybe they're facing health issues. They've got this whole range of challenges. And I think it can be very easy to just sort of throw up our hands and say, well, what are we going to do? Students have complex lives. It's understandable that they can't really focus the amount of time needed to be successful in college. It is what it is. And one of the reasons why I'm so excited to be here with all of you this morning is because we're really taking the chance to step back in a lot of the work that we're all engaged in and try to flip that narrative and say, what is our responsibility as colleges with programs and systems within our higher ed sector to really take ownership of this issue and work to make sure that students have all of the supports and resources in place at the front end of their college education to be financially stable enough so that they can really focus on their studies and not have to focus on putting food on the table at night. So we have a wonderful panel this morning who is going to touch on different elements of this issue. I'll wait here just for a moment for Olivia to introduce everybody, but I just wanted to say from Kresge's standpoint that, and for reasons that we all know, this work is tremendously important, and we really appreciate the chance to be at the table with all of you, to be learning about this issue, and to be really focused on very practical solutions. In particular, what we're talking about today, the notion of using public benefits that are available for students, creating better connections, and helping to very thoughtfully, creatively, and holistically build that safety net so that students can be secure and can focus on their college education, which, as we know, is absolutely critical for helping them achieve their full potential and to earn family-sustaining wages. So with that, I want to thank CLASP so much for your leadership of this initiative, Olivia for her leadership, Amy Ellen, Catherine Saunders, all the other folks who have made the Benefits Access for College Completion work go over the past couple of years. Also to AACC, which has been a very close partner and a longtime Kresge partner, and also to Single Stop, another Kresge key grantee partner in the benefits access world, for being here today. So thank you all for your time and attention, and look forward to learning with you for the rest of the day. Thanks.
Thank you so much, Caroline. Thank you for that wonderful introduction and for Kresge's consistent support. And we have a number of other funders here as well. I'm going to thank them in just a moment. I'm Olivia Golden. I'm the Executive Director of the Center for Law and Social Policy, CLASP. And I'm thrilled to be here with this great group. I think we have around 100 in the room and probably a couple of hundred listening on the web. And we have both a conference of a smaller group that's staying to really delve into the lessons and a large group here today to listen to this panel. I'm thrilled to be with this great panel at the Forum on Helping Low-Income Students Cross the Finish Line, Innovations that Support College Completion. What you're going to hear in this panel discussion is a rich and very practical discussion that connects the specific lessons of the Benefits Access for College Completion project, BACC for short, with bigger questions about how local, state, and national policy can make it possible for those students Caroline talked about, low-income students, often working, often raising a family, not just to start a college program, but to successfully complete a 2-year college degree, crucial in today's economy. I want to say a few thank yous to the people who made BACC possible, and then turn to the panelists, the format for the forum, and framing the conversation. CLASP led BACC in partnership with the American Association of Community Colleges, and I know they're represented here. I think Kathy Manis is here. Thank you so much. Thank you to our funders. In addition to Kresge, the Lumina Foundation, the Annie Casey Foundation, the Ford Foundation, and the Open Society Institute. We're very grateful for your commitment to the issue and to this initiative. Our evaluation partners, DVP Praxis Limited, represented on this panel, and their partner, OMG Center for Collaborative Learning, and most of all, the 7 community colleges. Cuyahoga Community College in Ohio, Gateway Community College in Kentucky, LaGuardia Community College in New York on this panel, Northampton Community College in Pennsylvania, Skyline Community College in California, and Lake Michigan Community College and Macomb Community College, both in Michigan. So you can tell a very broad array of settings and of national perspectives. Thank you so much for all you've done. So in just a moment, I want to frame a couple of the big themes for the panel, but first I want to introduce the panelists and describe the format. In the order the panelists will speak, we'll begin with my colleague, Amy Ellen Duke Benfield, who has led the BACC initiative from its inception. In her day job, what she does besides lead BACC, she's a senior policy analyst at CLASP. She focuses on post-secondary education and training for low-income students, including spearheading CLASP's national work around the Higher Education Act. Speaking after her will be Michael Bastone, Vice President for Student Affairs and Enrollment Management at LaGuardia Community College in New York. In addition, he's board chair of the LaGuardia College Association and LaGuardia Child Care Association. He's a highly respected leader in student affairs with a strong focus on community college student persistence and success. Third will be Derek Price, the president and principal of the consulting firm DVP Praxis, which has led the program evaluation for BACC. Before that, he served as Director of Higher Education Research at the Lumina Foundation. And he's an author of the wonderful executive summary that you have at your places and is going to talk about those findings hot off the presses today. And closing, we're very honored to have Jared Bernstein, Senior Fellow at the Center on Budget and Policy Priorities. He previously served as Chief Economist and Economic Advisor to Vice President Joe Biden, Executive Director of the White House Task Force on the Middle Class, and a member of President Obama's economic team. So it's an amazing group of people. Our format is that each panelist will give brief remarks, about 5 minutes, and then as moderator, I'll start the questions. Perhaps a few minutes before 10, somewhere around there, we'll turn to questions from the floor and from those of you listening on the web. And so I do want to note, it'll flash on your screen, but those of you on the webcast can send questions to events@clasp.org. And I'm also told that I'm supposed to give a suggestion to those of you who are tweeting, which is that you're supposed to use #collegecompletion. And those of you who are tweeting know what to do. I don't, but that's okay. So before I turn to Amy Ellen to begin, I just want to frame 3 questions, 3 themes that I'm expecting you'll hear a very lively discussion about. The first one Caroline already signaled, which is who are the students at today's community colleges and what are the barriers they experience to completing college? And Caroline really added to that. She said, and how do we take those barriers seriously and solve them, not just say that's the way the world is? Many of you in this room already know that typical community college students are not 18 years old and living at home supported by their parents. They're so-called non-traditional students, even though there are a lot of them, older, working and going to school, often parents themselves and raising a family, often people of color. So that's, I think, going to be one central topic for the conversation, because I think you'll hear from the panelists that the world of higher education policy maybe hasn't totally thought through the implications of these students' lives. And so part of what we've been learning in BACC is about what it takes to bring that appreciation fully into the higher education world. Secondly, I think you're going to hear a lot about the process of innovation. It's in the title of this forum. You'll hear about trying things, sometimes failing, learning from them, succeeding in the end. That may not be what people associate either with higher education institutions or public programs. Sometimes we hear a lot about bureaucracies or the inability to change, but I think as you listen to this panel, you're going to hear a lot about creativity and innovation. And third, I think you're going to hear some very interesting lessons about bringing together not only policy areas, but different cultures and points of view. Because BACC was really about linking higher education to financial supports available to many of these students as low-income working people, like nutrition help through the Supplemental Nutrition Assistance Program, or SNAP, used to be called food stamps, or like health insurance or other supports, child care assistance. So this project has required thinking about how do people see the world in higher education, how do people see the world in these work support and public benefit programs, how do employers, how do people who think about the economy see the world, and all, as I know Jared will remind us, in a very tough political and budgetary context. So I think you're going to learn a lot about how people put those pieces together and what the lessons are to the future. And I look forward to a great and lively discussion. And with that, I'm going to start with Amy Ellen.
Thank you. It's great to see all of you here this morning, and I'll apologize for the 9 a.m. start. I know that it's tough in DC with all the traffic and everything, but we have a lot we'd like to share with all of you, so that's why we chose it. I'd like to cover 3 topics this morning: why class got involved with BACC, what is BACC? Some of you might still be wondering, okay, I came to hear about innovations, I want to know what those innovations are, and then one lesson for the future that we'll talk about over the course of this panel or future panels. CLASP works to promote better lives for low-income people. One pathway out of poverty is via higher education, but paying for college and the living expenses, it can be too high of a barrier for low-income students, even at community colleges, which many people think are low cost, so that should be affordable. The average amount of unmet need for low-income community college students is $6,000. That's $6,000 of a gap between what they have to pay in their pocket and what the cost of attendance, what it's going to take to be able to go to a place like LaGuardia and get some education and training. Unfortunately, we also know the other narrative along here that federal and state aid have not kept up to match the price of college, and that students have additional living expenses that they have to pay for as well. We've also seen, as Olivia talked about, a demographic shift in who's going to community colleges. It's no longer simply the 18-year-old who has guidance from their parents and support from their parents. It's also the laid-off manufacturing worker who's been working for 20 years, the low-wage single mother at CVS who filled your prescription, and the out-of-school youth who's trying to go back and get a GED and get into a certificate program. All of those folks are also populating community colleges as well. One big barrier for folks is that 40% of these students do not complete a degree within 6 years of their entry. 40%, that's a lot of people that we're bleeding out along the way. And a lot of non-traditional students, a lot of those students are low-income students. So if we're serious about getting more students to the finish line, which I hear a lot of rhetoric about, our president's excited about, the foundations in the room are excited about, that means we have to put some real skin in the game and really think about what it's going to take for us to be competitive globally and how we're going to get people in family supporting wages. And one of the pathways by which we can do that is to get more people in education and training, but that means that there has to be a promise there that will also support them through that period. We have to address student financial stability. Excuse me. As part of BACC, CLASP, and AACC worked with 7 colleges that Olivia mentioned to integrate information, application assistance, and follow-up into their existing college processes. One thing that brought these funders together is slightly different, was this goal to see, could colleges actually embed this in their existing college processes? Could they embed this in financial aid? Could they embed it in counseling? Could they make this homegrown approach to benefits access work? We weren't sure, and luckily we have Derek on the panel who will tell us a little bit more about what the results of that that was, or I'd ask you to talk to some of the other peer colleges that are in the room, because that answer is a resounding yes. For low-income students juggling work, school, and family responsibilities, the combination of financial aid with health insurance, child care assistance, transportation assistance that'll help them get back and forth to work and to school are integral in increasing persistence and completion. And if we're serious about getting more low-income folks into good jobs, that means we have to pay attention to what it takes to get that student to completion. Connecting students with income supports, though, is not the be-all, end-all strategy. I'm not trying to say that here today at all. I think it's one of a suite of comprehensive financial supports that colleges need to think about providing, and that benefits can serve as a complement, but not a replacement for those essential core financial aid pieces that we have right now, Pell Grant and state grant aid. Looking ahead, one challenge that I hope that we'll dive into later, and I see I have 30 seconds left, so this is perfect, is the fact that our public benefits policies don't always support our goals around college completion. We have governors setting very ambitious goals around college completion. We have a president who set an ambitious goal, and yet some of these social policies actually make it harder for students to pursue a post-secondary education, especially a post-secondary education that will lead to a good job. And so one of the things that I hope that we'll explore over the course of the next couple days is that when we think about college completion, and we're really passionate about getting more students to the finish line, that means we also have to think much more critically about a broader set of policies beyond higher education as well. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Amy Ellen. Michael?
Good morning. Proud to have been invited to talk with you today about building comprehensive financial supports for low-income students and our work as part of benefit access for college completion. LaGuardia is an uncommon place because of the student population that the college serves, predominantly minority, immigrant, low-income, and first generation. LaGuardia terms itself the world's community college, with students born in over 160 countries, speaking more than 110 native languages. LaGuardia's diverse student population includes 35% Hispanic, 19% Asian, 15% Black, 12% white, and 19% other or unknown. Over 2/3 of our students were born outside of the United States. Indeed, half of our incoming students have lived in the United States for less than 5 years. In short, LaGuardia is one of the premier gateways for today's immigrant population. The need of our students is great. 60% of first-generation college students, 2/3 of our entering students report a family income of $25,000 or less. The college does an analysis of unmet financial need of its students, and that analysis calculates that the annual student costs for tuition and fees, room and board, books and supplies, personal expenses, and transportation for both students living at home and living independently, and compares the average and estimates the kind of financial aid awards that are necessary. Note that room and board estimates the cost of living in a community, as LaGuardia is a commuter campus without residence halls. For students living at home, the average financial need is $8,872, and the average financial aid award is $3,738. And thus, the average financial gap or unmet need is about $5,000 for students living at home, and actually about $10,000 for those students who are living independently, which is 45% of our student population. And so with 1 out of 7 people living in poverty in the United States, 46.5 million citizens, and more than $65 billion in federal and state government resources set aside to help people escape poverty unused, I immediately wanted to work with Single Stop USA to get my students, which are among the neediest in the nation, access to resources that they would need to help them to move forward in their lives. Through Single Stop, we provided benefits access, free legal services, free financial counseling, and free tax preparation. Within the first year of the program, we were able to get 1,000 students nearly $1 million in public benefits. From the grant from BACC that enabled us to do research, offer professional development and training opportunities, purchase equipment and to expand the number of benefit specialists, provide outreach materials on a much larger scale, and hire additional professional staff to work with the increase in student traffic to our single-stop program. I can tell you that we were able to bring academic affairs and student affairs together in a much broader way. And we were able to ultimately see that today more than 10,000 students have been connected to nearly $20 million in benefits, tax refunds, and supportive services. We believe that the initial information about persistence is quite promising. We learned that students who participated in their application process, for whom we could confirm benefits, have now changed from part-time status to full-time status at a rate 6% higher than the general student body. Moreover, confirmed benefit recipients' re-enrollment rate was also 7% higher than the general student body. And so these initial results let us know that we can move the needle for the hardest hit economically when we have the resources to do so. Our definition of student success is achieving our mission so that graduates become critical thinkers and socially responsible citizens who shape an evolving society. Graduation and strengthening the economic life of our community really defines success. We are positioned to improve our outcomes for the real heroes of our story, the students that we serve. And these programs help us make a difference. Students like Lila Quinones, who was 16 when she got pregnant and was thrown out of her house, was able to get support from her family. Her family put her out, so she had to find her own way. We got her in a GED program. She was able to get public benefits. She actually moved from the GED to an associate degree, went to NYU, and now is in Oxford studying. Because we were able to help her, she was able to turn the dream of completing college into a success story. But there are so many others that are not in that situation. And we want to use these programs to help do just that.
Thank you very much. Derek.
Obviously, I drew the short straw because I have to follow Michael Baston. Always good to hear from you, Michael. Thank you for sharing that. We wanted to share a high-level, quick summary. There's a copies on your table for all of you on our evaluation that we've done for benefits access over the last several years. And the key thing that I want to emphasize here, and it's been said a number of times, is that this really was a demonstration for adaptation and learning. Right? So this wasn't, let's take a project, let's take a model, let's implement it everywhere and see what happens. This was about colleges trying to figure stuff out of providing benefits to their students above and beyond student financial aid. And our evaluation was tasked with learning along with the colleges and then trying to lift up some key things that any college that wants to do this kind of work needs to be prepared to consider and potentially do. And that's what I want to emphasize today. So there's three big findings for colleges in terms of implementing benefits access into their community college operations. The first one is that the services need to be provided in what we're calling a centralized hub. Okay, and the services that we're talking about here are things like pre-screening, screening, application assistance, and case follow-up. Those are the four types of services we're talking about. And these need to happen in a centralized hub. They can't be diffused throughout campus in umpteen places where students have to go every other place to get this done. It needs to be in a centralized location. That's number one. Every college moved in this direction or started with this type of a model over the course of benefits access for college completion. The second finding is this notion of opting out versus opting in. So at the very beginning, the idea here for the colleges was, let's go out and spread the net wide and try to get people to come in so we can pre-screen and screen them and offer us all these services. And that didn't work out very well. Students didn't show up for lots of reasons. The key change that happened was colleges began to think, well, how can I offer a pre-screen initial type of assistance where a student is already at? How do you opt out? Make them opt out of that instead of voluntarily to opt in. So colleges began trying to do this type of pre-screen in places where folks already were coming, like financial aid, or their counseling for assistance, or their advisor. And they would give a quick pre-screen of 5 questions that might tell someone they might be eligible for benefits, and then offer them some additional supports if they wanted them while they were there already. That was a big difference. Opt out of these early pre-screening was a second key finding. Third key finding, and this isn't a surprise because often in the higher education evaluation world we come up with this finding, and this is notion of leadership. But too often that idea of leadership gets defined at the very most highest level in an institution, at the executive level, the president. And without a doubt, the president's commitment to this kind of work is critical. But our finding was that progress is made. Benefits access services can get integrated into ongoing operations, needs more than just the president's support. It needs leadership and commitment up and down the hierarchy of an institution, to the dean level, to the program director level. It has to cross over between student services, where these types of things are often housed, and academic affairs, which is typically more focused on instruction in the classroom. Everybody, leadership in all of those places needs to come together and acknowledge and be committed to this type of service as a priority for the institution, even if they're not responsible for delivering the service themselves. So that institution-wide buy-in and commitment up and down the hierarchy of leadership, across divisions and departments, that was crucial for these colleges to embed these services into their ongoing operations. So those were the 3 key takeaways for implementing this type of service at colleges. Now, at the onset of this evaluation, we also very much wanted to learn about the relationship between benefits access receipt and persistence in college completion. And we worked with the colleges in the 5 states. We did not work with them in Michigan, to try to help them make connections with their human service agencies, their state and county human service agencies, so we could match records. Anonymously, de-identified, following all the right privacy rules and regulations, trying to make that match so we could do this kind of analysis. And for the most part, that just didn't happen. There were lots of barriers in each community that limited the types of things that were done. But we were able to do this in one college in Kentucky, Gateway Community and Technical College, and we have provided some initial preliminary analysis of that in this report. And the key takeaway, there's 2 key takeaways here. The first one is when we looked at low-income Max Pell students who also received benefits and compared them with the similar group of students that did not, in a statistical way that's in the report that you can look at more fully, we found that students low income that got these types of benefits, SNAP, TANF cash assistance, child care, and transportation, were more likely to enroll in more terms during the demonstration than those who did not. They stayed enrolled. This was very important because if you don't stay enrolled, you can't get to the outcomes that people are concerned about. We then examined a little bit more just the group that got benefits, just some exploratory analysis that we think might be the most promising and exciting thing for the panel and for all of you to talk about. And it does appear suggestively at this college, at least in Kentucky, that if students get more than one benefit, so they get food stamps and maybe TANF cash assistance, or they get some TANF with some child care support, but more than one, the persistence, the number of terms enrolled, the ability to accumulate credits and earn credentials looks like there's a nice bump here, and that they are actually performing not only better than other students with benefits, but better than folks who didn't get benefits at all. And that's a suggestive finding, an exploratory finding, but it does indicate that perhaps bundling these kinds of services the way the panel has already implied might very well be an effective strategy to help these families and these students make it through college. Thank you.
Thank you very much. Jared.
Well, thank you to Olivia and Kresge. I spent yesterday with the Kresge Foundation, so I feel like either they're stalking me or I'm stalking them. I'm here to give a bit more of an overview, but I did want to start from this perspective of college completion. I'm old enough to remember when the 2 goals in this particular space about helping less advantaged students and newly arrived immigrants, the kinds of folks that we've been talking about, achieve higher education attainment. It was all about graduating high school and getting into college. You kind of washed your hands and said you were done after that. We just didn't think enough about college completion. I'm going back, numerous decades. But let me throw out three percentages that guide my thinking on this. 90%, 70%, and 50%. 90% is the share of 24 to 29-year-olds, something like that, who graduate high school. So that should be 100%, but it's 90%. So there's a little bit of a margin there to improve, and obviously it's essential. But we've done pretty well on that front. 70% are the percent of kids who finish high school and go to college. Okay, so that's also could use improvement, but it's a decent margin. 50% are the percent of kids who finish high school, go to college, and complete. So the product of those three probabilities equals the college completion rate. So it's a conditional probability chain. You got to finish high school, you got to get into college, and then you have to finish college. Well, the lowest probability there is that 50% completion rate, and it's much lower for some of the populations we're talking about today. So if you think about where is the margin that could have potentially the most traction, it's very much in this completion space. And that's what got me so interested in what's going on here in tandem with the insights we've heard today from the very beginning of the session about how important college completion is in this economy. That said about this importance of completing either 2 or 4 year college, I very much agree with the general consensus. But I think that the way economists, anyway, generally understand this is basically kind of wrong. I think most policymakers and economists walk around this town thinking there's a skill shortage and everybody should graduate college, and that's kind of all she wrote, without really thinking much about a lot of the kinds of granular pathways that have been discussed here today. So I think the way to understand the nexus between education and the economy and jobs, and here I'm moving into my more broad-based perspective, is not in this traditional sense of a skills mismatch, that employer demands are not matched to the supply of skills that workers bring to the job market. In fact, there's far less evidence for that than you would think from listening to the debate, and I'd be happy to talk more about that in Q&A. Instead, you have to think about it again more granularly. This idea that there's a skills mismatch and therefore everyone should go to school and then you're done is much too vague and disconnected from what's happening on the ground. Think of it. I think a much better way to think about it. And I'm going to be a boring old economist for a minute. Maybe I've already been a boring old economist, but I'm going to be even more of a boring old economist for a minute. Is to think about basically kind of an old-fashioned production function where inputs generate outputs, and if you have better inputs, you get better outputs. And human capital is a critical input. So the way forward is not just to advocate willy-nilly for a greater college attainment, it's to take a clear-eyed look at the education and job training needs across the life cycle. Now that definitely requires kids with STEM training, but it also requires health technicians with an AA degree who can keep an MRI working well. It requires child care workers who thoroughly understand how kids learn. It requires home health aides who know a lot about gerontology. So we should think about the broad scope of the needs in our economy. And by the way, a number of those occupations that I just ticked through are all in the non-tradable sector, which is actually very important in such a globalized climate. I'd also want to put in a word, and can elaborate more during the discussion if it's useful. I'm kind of dancing around this already in my comments. The importance of sectoral training. The idea not being that you broadly, get this out of here. She just said 1 minute. The idea that that you broadly sprinkle some training on people, cross your fingers and hope for the best. I think we're past that now, and I think we're much more thinking about the sectoral demands, even at a local level, of what employers actually need. But also learning while you're earning, apprenticeships, contextualized learning, very important. My last 30 seconds, I'd like to talk, or at least begin a discussion, which I think we may have more of, I think we should have a lot more of, about politics and budgets, which Olivia mentioned earlier. Olivia is always very upbeat, so she gives me the depressing part to talk about. I actually don't think it's as depressing as it seems if you're coming off of a very tough election for many of the issues we're talking about, because you hear what's being discussed up here. Again, we're talking about lots of things that are happening at the sub-national level. Congress may well be closed for business in terms of gridlock for a while coming. But obviously, there's still a lot that needs to happen at the subnational level, and a lot that I think will happen. However, where it ties into our politics are two things I want to alert you to. Because obviously there's very important nexus between national budgets and the resources that folks on the panel need to do the great stuff they're doing. One is called NDD, which is a very unfortunate Washington acronym, and it stands for Non-Defense Discretionary. That's the part of the budget where many of the programs we're talking about, and especially the ones that you heard about that are so important in complementing the lives of many of these students, whether it's health insurance, childcare, transportation. Much of that lives in the NDD part of the budget, and that continues to get squeezed and whacked under these sequestration things you've heard about. And the second is block granting. That is an aspiration of many in the Republican leadership. And that says take something like SNAP, which is another important dimension of what we've talked about today in the benefit space, and instead of making it entitlement that people get once they're eligible for it, just give a lump sum to the states, block grant it, and let the states figure out what to do when demand for the program exceeds the resources. So NDD and block granting, I think, are two very important enemies to keep your, I should say the cuts in NDD and block granting are two important enemies to keep your eyes out for.
Thank you very much. Listening to this panel, it's clear that there's a huge amount of material to talk about at every level, from the day-to-day work of communities, community colleges, to the biggest picture conversation about the Congress. And one of the strengths, I think, is that we have the people here who can tie it together. So I'm going to start with a question that I think picks up on several people's themes about the students themselves. And really everybody talked about completion, the 90, 70, and 50, as Jared said, and the way in which students today, you heard some very promising ideas about how having potentially more access to benefits, more financial security might improve those. But I want to ask everybody a little bit about what they think the barriers to completion are when people are struggling for money. What is it that goes on? Is it that is work while you're going to school a good thing or a bad thing? Do people concentrate differently on their studies? What are some of the reasons you think that the support from these programs contributes to completion? Amy Ellen, do you want to start?
Sure. I always like when I hear that question about work, because we oftentimes hear anecdotes about, well, I worked my way through school, and so if I did it, then everyone else behind me can do it. But we have very different levels and amounts of work going on than we ever have in the past in the college sector. More people are working longer hours, and then we also have research that shows us working more than 20 hours a week has negative implications for persistence and completion. Working 15 hours a week has positive. You know, it lends more, I guess, framework, foundation by which you have to build your life and gets you organized. But this idea that students are working 35 hours or more a week, which is what community college students, around 25% of community college students are doing, is an unbearable burden on their ability to get to all their classes and take care of their family. And so what ends up happening is they drop down to part-time attendance, which has negative implications for persistence. They drop out altogether. They stop out, think that they'll come back. Once you lose someone, it's much harder to get them back in. And so that's what I would say about how we're facing that challenge.
So there's a lot of fine-tuned knowledge about how much work is a good thing and then how much really makes it impossible to finish. Derek, Michael, anything you want to add?
When you think about the LaGuardians that are navigating this complex system, the average income for the students is $12,734 for those who are able to support through our public benefit programs. 46% work at least part-time. 37% have one or more children in their household, and 60% are female. So when we think about the students that we're serving, we have to understand the complexities of the challenges that the students have. There's often an incomplete picture of what the student experience is and what the demands on the life of the student who is really trying to move into the middle class and beyond the poverty that so often envelops these students.
Go ahead, Jared.
I just want to make a comment. We've been talking a lot about two-year programs appropriately, but only half of college dropping out occurs in the first 2 years. I think too few schools pay attention to attrition in the second 2 years. And one of the things I would note about this 90, 70, 50 series of probabilities I suggested is that the 90 is really high because there's just a ton of pressure from your family and society to finish high school. The 70 is pretty high because there's some pressure to get into college. The 50 is pretty low because at that point you're often on your own. So there's a natural connection between those numbers and the extent to which society is sort of pushing you towards those goals, or not.
One of the things that to sort of step out of moderator for a moment into my life, which is particularly about child and family and poverty issues, one of the other things that comes out of this conversation is the intersection of work and raising a family as a characteristic for many. And so to the extent that that's also on people's plate as they move through, it's an opportunity. Some of you may have seen our prior forum on two-generational services. Maybe it's good for kids when their parents go back to school, but it's at the same time a challenge. Let me ask one other thing that, again, I think rises out of this. Community colleges clearly have lots of pressure too, right? It's not just that student who's hearing lots of messages about work, put food on the table, raise your kids, and go to school. Community colleges are hearing lots of messages about be more rigorous educationally. Jared said pay attention to employers and what they need. Don't just think about school as separate. And now we're saying, and think about the challenges your students face economically. How can it be possible for an institution to address all those different demands at once? And I'm going to let Michael start this one if he wants, and then I know Amy Ellen and Derek will probably have some things to say.
It is very interesting that community colleges and colleges in general are set up that it has the student to navigate complex structures and systems that have the least amount of experience with these systems, with expectations that they're going to be able to do it without issue. And then to say that we serve the hardest to serve students with probably the least resources. You know, while we serve the most academically challenged, the most financially challenged students, our private research colleges receive five more times funding per student. So you can have as many demands as you like, but if we're going to have the ability to really meet the demands of the nation by helping students move through systems that are still antiquated, by thinking about trying to meet accountability standards without thinking about the students we serve today, without removing sort of this 1950s or 60s notion of what a college student looks like. And no one's driving up to campus, dropping off Johnny, and, you know, hopeful 4 beautiful years under a tree somewhere thinking about life. So, you know, many of our students, they don't go to college to find themselves. They have to find themselves employable at the conclusion of it. So without support financially, it makes it difficult to meet every possible challenge that every possible person would want through the community college or other educational systems.
So I'm going to push you just a little bit, Michael, because it seems to me that partly you were saying it's not reasonable to ask us to do all these things unless you give us more money, which is I think a helpful point. But surely in the course of the years you worked on BACC, you actually solved a lot of problems. I don't think you would say that you gave up on quality and rigor in order to do this work. So can you say a little bit about within the institution, what kind of vision do people have to have? What do you have to do to get people to move forward on several of those goals at once?
I guess from my perspective, the whole institution has to come together to try to support students, regardless of whether the funding is at the levels that we want or not. And at our institution, we really truly work together with academic affairs and student affairs and all of the other divisions to find ways to embed our supports for public benefits throughout the college. So we think that that's an important step, but it doesn't make up for all the other things that have to be a part of a successful approach to help students complete.
Amy Ellen or Derek? Go ahead.
Yeah, I'd like to add something related to the evaluation. The first thing, I think it reflects what Michael just said here, is that the colleges in the demonstration, they could have thrown up their hands when they ran into barriers in terms of not only embedding them into their organizational structures, but also facing the challenges and trying to help challenges that the students were having. But instead, they embraced it. They didn't throw up their hands. They embraced these challenges and tried to figure out ways and learning that they could do their systems better so that they could take pressures off the students who are grappling with various things. So there is this notion of embracing the challenges despite the context of limited resources and the demands that the students face. So I want to say that certainly came through across all of the colleges in the demonstration. The second comment I wanted to make, and I think it might tie into the first one, and maybe it's a little bit too granular, but I think it's illustrative. So imagine all of the rules, for those of you in the room, and there are many of you who know federal financial aid, right? Getting the Pell Grant and all the regulations that have to do around that is hard enough. Now we've asked colleges, let's just use SNAP for example, to try to get students access to SNAP, which has all different rules, all different requirements. For example, work. We just talked about work. There are rules. You have to work to get SNAP. You've got to be on work study to be eligible to get a bypass. There are all these issues that colleges weren't even aware of, and now they have to figure that out at the same time the students trying to figure it out. That means we've got two policies that are supposed to help students in marginalized situations improve their lives that are not aligning and helping one another. They're actually creating problems for people who want to use these policies in this kind of constructive way to help people along the pathway. And the community colleges in the demonstration tried to figure that out. How do we figure that out? And it was hard, and it does require not only resources, it requires a level of knowledge and expertise that was quite challenging for them to embrace. And so I think that ties into the larger issues, Amy Ellen and Olivia, about policy. Jared, policy, can we get some policies to line up here so that if we're trying to help people get through school, that SNAP, cash assistance from TANF, child care, transportation can work in a constructive, complementary way along with federal financial aid? I mean, ultimately, that's the lever that we would look to the federal government or to state and local governments to make this job a little bit easier for colleges who are embracing the challenge.
Amy Ellen, then I actually want to ask a follow-up question based on that.
Derek, I'm going to take you with me wherever I go now, because you just said with great passion one of the great challenges in this initiative. All of these schools, what's sort of amazing about these schools is that they had to learn about these public benefits programs. So it wasn't that we just dropped 3 benefits specialists down on their campus and then they went. They actually had to grow it up. Mary and Hayden-Manick from Northampton over there had to learn all the rules related to TANF and SNAP in Pennsylvania. Now she's an amazing resource. But that points to these colleges were willing to try something new. They're hungry to try something new that they think can help more low-income students persist and complete. And when we talk about college completion, there's often this danger of creaming students out. The lowest skilled students aren't going to get there, so why should we invest our resources in them? We should invest them in the smarter students, the students who have fewer barriers to completion. But these colleges all said, no, we're going to look at those students who have the most barriers and work on removing those tough barriers. And I think we should give community colleges some credit for that. And it makes me feel very hopeful when we do talk about a completion agenda, that I know institutions out there are concerned about those students that are most in need.
So I'm going to ask one or two more follow-up questions, but I want people to start thinking about your own questions. We're going to shift to the audience in a moment. We have microphones, and we also have some from the web. So I'm going to ask another question, and then I'll turn to some of the questions from the web. So on this question, I said to you earlier that my own background is with these programs that we're now criticizing, the variety of work support and public benefit programs. And so when I think about those programs, what I think about is, well, wait a moment, isn't all the money in Pell Grants and financial aid, isn't there more public support for that? So I think about the obstacles, for example, to expanding child care benefits, and I think there's good news here. The President yesterday signed terrific new child care reauthorization legislation, which you can read about on the class website. But the bad news is we're serving the lowest number of children in the child care subsidy program in a dozen years because the dollars have gone down. So the rules have gotten better, but the dollars have gone down. So I guess I want to ask everybody the question of, do you think that in the work you've done, there are compelling messages either for state legislators, federal legislators, governors, about why putting more public money through getting it through taxation or wherever into these kinds of supports is a good thing? Do you have any experience? I'm guessing, Michael, that maybe the college you tell your story to people in New York. What are the ways that you would tell this story to try to break through a climate where, as Jared said, investing in these young people through these programs is hard to do?
Like me to start?
Okay, and I'm wondering if Jared's heard anything that would be a story he would want to tell too, but I'll start with Michael, and I'll come back over here.
Well, I think telling the story is very important, and we do a lot of work with our students, with our local elected officials, really to try to sensitize them to the importance of the issues, but also to connect those issues to the future of the country. The reality is our nation's future requires a more educated workforce, and the community colleges who service so much of what that workforce will look like, without the resources, without the support, without providing the pathways, if you will, to be able to continue and complete, it will have an impact on whether this nation will be the innovative country that we hope ourselves to be. The community college sector is the sector that's going to produce the number of graduates necessary to move the country forward. And for our ability to have our students be a voice in that, and those industry leaders who understand that these students are going to make up the industries and the focus of the future, that's the critical piece which I hope will continue to get buy-in and investment long term.
Jared?
Well, it's a tough environment for the kinds of things we're talking about, but it's kind of a confusing one, at least to me. And I've been hanging around this swamp for a long time. Everybody says, all the policymakers say, we really need to boost college completion precisely for the reason you just heard. It's critical to our economy in a competitive global world, and in fact, the college completion rates, attainment rates, I should say, the share of the adult population with at least a four-year college degree in the U.S. is starting to look much less flattering relative to all the other advanced economies. We're kind of stalled and they're moving up. So you hear this all the time. But there's this massive disconnect between this idea and a lot of what we're talking about here. The idea that it should happen, but we shouldn't devote any resources to it, which is magical thinking. There's a lot of that goes on, and it's bad magic. I guess the one thing I'll say is that, and Olivia mentioned the word investment. It is true that for the dwindling group of rational policymakers, the idea that you would invest in the future has a lot more persuasiveness than the idea that you would provide somebody something to just consume today. So part of this is a framing challenge, which happens to connect quite neatly to research, which says when you provide someone with food stamps, a lot of people walk around this town saying, okay, you're helping them to eat for a day, and that's okay, you know, but it's not really an investment in the future. That's wrong. It actually is an investment in the future in very much the way you're hearing from the panel today. And there's now compelling research that shows that kids who grow up in households that look just the same as the household next door, but one got SNAP and one didn't, actually those kids do quite a bit better lately on a variety of dimensions, whether it's earnings or college completion or staying out of jail. There's lots of good, and of course, you know, basic health. So I think framing a lot of what we're talking about, a transportation program, that may not sound like investment. It is. It's investment in the future. I think that's an important way to think about this.
And the other thing that strikes me is that some of what Amy Ellen said before, and actually Michael, several of you said about the way in which people combine work and school is also an important piece of framing. Because in the world of these benefit programs, much of what's made it so hard to spend money on them is the bitterness of people who are working in low-wage jobs or feel as though their lives have been spent that way, about people who, to use Michael's words, they see as sitting under the tree and thinking. And so telling the story of the lives in a way that suggests there isn't such a divide between working and going to school, that people do them together, feels to me like a useful insight as well. Amy Ellen or Derek, anything you want to add to how would you frame it in a way that would potentially get resources?
Picking up on a few different threads here, one of the presidents in our initiative said this is a short-term investment for a long-term gain. And another thing, and this is Gateway Community and Technical Colleges, says there's a time to give and there's a time to receive. And because public benefits are not popular in a place like Kentucky. I mean, they were very candid when they applied for this initiative. There is a lot of stigma. And when you're in a community that's had a large manufacturing base that's moved on, you have a lot of low-income men who have never had to even think about the prospect of needing this help. But I think it was important for them to be able to frame it as a short-term investment, both to the public, but also for those students, that this is something to help them get over the hump. And once they're over the hump, they're going to get a good job and they'll be taxpayers.
That's very interesting. Derek?
I would just tie this together. I like Jared's notion of SNAP, for example, being thought of as an investment in the future. I think that's really good. And tying it back to the completion agenda, I mean, there is a big assumption, which I think pans out in a lot of data that a lot of other people, not me, research, of the value of education and its payoff in the labor market. And it's not just a payoff at a bachelor's degree, for example. It's a payoff in two-year associate's degrees. Sometimes it's a payoff with a shorter-term certificate in a key occupational sector where there's some high-skilled jobs that you don't need a four-year degree or even a two-year degree for. So if education is that pathway to jobs and employment, if education is the way that we as a nation believe is how we're going to get people to not be reliant on public benefits, then it really becomes an early investment using the resources through public benefits and prioritizing the education and training that you can get from these systems and these programs above other kinds of things that are also important, right? So it's not that work isn't important, but you know what? I think I'd rather a student focus on their education and training and being comfortable with their kid has childcare so they can go spend time enrolling full-time in college, even in a short-term certificate program, so they can get a good job in a short period of time. To me, that's a higher priority and ought to be a more important part of the investment strategy for SNAP or even TANF than perhaps some of the other types of priorities that people have made in the past.
So I'm going to read the question from the web, and after that I'm going to go to the audience, and people may want to start lining up at the microphones if you have your questions ready. So the question from the web is from a community college administrator in the state of Washington, and the question is, do you have examples from the BACC schools of effective faculty or advisor collaboration to support low-income and first-generation community college students? So we've talked a lot about administrative techniques, but what about faculty? How did you involve them? How open were they? What were some effective strategies? Michael
do you wanna
first?
take it first?
Okay, and then we'll come down here.
Sure. this was a very big priority area for me to make sure that our academic affairs folks and student affairs folks work together. And we developed service learning opportunities. So we had health services or health sciences majors from human services to be benefit buddies, to work with our single stop program to actually help the students complete the applications, sometimes go to their appointments with the local agency, and ultimately they learned a lot about the craft that they would do in the work that they do as internships. We also had students who were in the marketing and business areas to do some advertisements as part of their classroom experience for public benefit. So what we wanted to do was to really engage the college community. We invited levels of training for advisors so that it could be a part of our advisement structure. So we really looked to make public benefits not some sort of abstract concept, but that we involve the academic affairs folks in the process of educating the campus about the importance of this issue.
Thank you.
I'd have to say that trying to make that, it was a challenge for the colleges to sort of connect the academic and student services side during the demonstration period. And as the demonstration period was ending for BACC, there became increased attention to sort of connecting with the classroom. And so we don't have a lot of evaluative evidence, at least, on the effectiveness or examples of that strategy. But I can say that during the work, there were a couple of things, and perhaps some of the colleges that are on panels later today will share more details about this. But I know, for example, that at Skyline College in California, they really connected with certain kinds of learning communities. Learning communities, for those of you familiar with that, are often thematic-based, where people that have common interests come together. They often pair classes together in different ways. And learning communities at Skyline, they had some that served students that were very similar to the students they were targeting for benefits access support through this effort. And so they made inroads into those learning communities where they could provide information and make connections there. And the faculty in those learning communities were very supportive of that effort, as an example. A second example from Tri-C and Cuyahoga that they might mention, and this is not true in every state, but in many states, counseling are actually faculty. They're not, they're faculty and counselors. They're not outside of the faculty or academic realm. And so at Tri-C, the counseling faculty was on board very early on because they taught early sort of orientation, getting ready for college, student success types of courses, and those faculty embraced this notion, incorporated it into their content in the course to try to drive students to benefit services that Tri-C was trying to do. So those were two ways they connected.
Thank you. Amy Ellen, anything you wanted to add?
Yeah,
And then we're going to
that,
go to
that I
some-
think all the colleges would say that faculty have played an incredible role and are much more sensitive to the needs, the diverse needs of this population than they were before. And faculty have been a big referral source for students, which that's okay. I mean, that's enough. Faculty have a lot on their plate. Teaching is high demand, and we're always putting more demands on them for academic, pushing up academic, improving dev ed, and all that kind of thing. I don't think we ever thought faculty themselves would be doing screening and application assistance. But referring students and noticing a student in the class who has some academic problems that are presenting themselves as academic, but actually once you scratch the surface or financial problems is something that we've seen a lot more schools come across.
Interesting. So that makes me think of what Michael said earlier about the key thing is that everybody's on board with the same mission. They may have different roles and different places in it and roles to play. We have a question from the audience. Why don't you say who you are and then ask the question. So the questions were about how the benefits align or don't with the Pell Grant, which I think I'll go to Amy Ellen for, and about how to connect people receiving one benefit with others that they might be eligible for, right? Those were the questions. Amy Ellen?
I'll take a stab at that first one. I'm happy to report that actually receiving these public benefits does not have largely, vast majority of them, does not have a negative implication on the Pell Grant receipt or the level of the Pell Grant. These are considered disregarded for the purposes of applying for financial aid. So that's one good thing. Where it gets tough is on the other side when you have requirements that come along with being on SNAP or receiving TANF, a work requirement that's teamed with if you want to go to college, you need to do that. And also then there are some, there are some programs that if a student is receiving particular form of financial aid, like state level aid, it is not exempt once it's being used for living expenses versus tuition. SNAP has a rather complex set of rules around that that differentiates between financial aid that's going, non-Pell financial aid that's going for helping students versus Pell Grants. And then what was the other question?
Well, the other one was about reaching out to people receiving one benefit to get another, and I can comment on sort of what the human services world is doing about that.
And that was something that we had a couple of colleges right off the bat came back and they said, we picked our cohort, we are really excited, and we found out that half of everyone in our cohort is already receiving benefits. And we were like, that's great. Now you can help them with recertifying or connect them to additional benefits. And that's how the colleges responded and have been pretty successful at that.
So can I ask you one other follow-up, Amy Ellen? Because you said, which I think is important information for everybody, that in general, having the other benefits does not harm Pell Grant amounts or eligibility. But are there some other ways that you think Pell Grants should be improved to be better for non-traditional students? Are there a couple highlights that you want to let people know about?
Yeah, I think there are a couple easy ones. One is the population that we are tending to talk about tends to want to go to school full-time. We're not talking about the 18-year-old who takes the summer off and goes and gets an internship at CLASP. Or Center on Budget. We're talking about a low-income working adult who wants to get that degree as fast as they can. And so the elimination of year-round Pell, which essentially was a second Pell Grant, was very tough for this population. And that would be the biggest one, I would say. Another policy that's incredibly important is there's such a thing as the income protection allowance, or what we call more popularly the work penalty. And that's the amount of your earnings that you get to keep before it's counted against your financial aid package. And the fact is that low-income students who are supporting families need a lot more resources to be able to support their families while they're going to school than those who don't. And so that's another policy that we're always on guard for, to ensure that that income protection allowance for independent students with kids is at an appropriate level to ensure persistence and completion.
And those are both changes that would have to happen at the national level?
Yes.
They're not? Okay. We'll come back later to people's ideas for state financial aid policy improvements. Anybody want to add on either of those points?
I just want to ask a question. Would it be useful? It's always hard to get back things that you've given up, especially in this climate. But would it be useful if year-round Pell, if one were to advocate for year-round Pell to come back, but have an age restriction so that you had to be over a certain age to get it? I mean, it may not be perfect, but would that be something that might be worth pursuing?
That's an intriguing idea. I'd want to look at the
follow-up
data, but that's a
conversation.
follow-up. Yeah, that's a very intriguing idea.
So you could look at data and get some sense of it.
Olivia, you know way more about this than me, but I'd like to give an example of, at a state level, not part of the BSE evaluation, but in South Carolina, for example, with the Affordable Care Act, they created some fast-track opportunities so that students that were already receiving, for example, SNAP, could automatically be enrolled in the Medicaid benefit. This was a non-expansive state, by the way.
Right.
And they
So
tried
it's not very many people
right.
because the income level is so
Right,
low. but
exactly. They
it's-
have those rules. But the idea was that if I'm eligible for one, I automatically get the other under a fast track. And so there's my idea. Is there a way to fast track these types of things? If I have SNAP, I'm automatically Pell Max, which may in fact be the rule. If I have Pell, I'm automatically, maybe with a question, I can pick up some SNAP benefits automatically without having to go through all of the process of verification and everything else. So some kind of fast track idea that links these together may be worth pursuing.
And in fact, CLASP and the center are working together on some of those ideas with more of a focus on what state health and human services agencies can do. So how can they make it more automatic to connect health insurance, SNAP? In some cases, childcare. Childcare has the problem that the amount of money is capped, but you can also make it easier. And we've been talking a lot about mechanisms like that would make it simpler.
I just want to add one thing, going back on the public benefits Pell side, is that there are 5 programs that the FAFSA asks about. That's the free financial aid form that you fill out to apply for Pell and federal student loans. And they ask questions: do you receive TANF? Do you receive free and reduced price lunch? And the purpose of those questions is because if you answer the affirmative and your income is below $23,000, $24,000, you are automatically shot into a simplified needs test. The complexity of the FAFSA is taken out of your way. And the department does have the discretion to add more programs to that list to make it easier for more folks to answer. The other thing is the department can also talk about why those questions are there. Because one thing Derek found in his research was that gross underreporting of students receiving public benefits on their FAFSA form, because they're concerned if they answer in the affirmative, that'll hurt their eligibility instead of helping it. So that's another thing that's important to keep in mind that I hope the department will think about
So
further.
at both federal and state levels, I think what you're saying is that in addition to any policy changes, being more articulate, communicating better about the particulars and how they ought to support people's completion would be important in itself. We have another question. I'm going to take a question in person and then one from the web. Go ahead.
Liz Shawn Richburg Hayes. I'm the director of MDRC's Young Adult and Post-Secondary Education Policy Area. I have 2 questions. The first is how BACC connects with other initiatives in this area. Single Stop, the Working Family Success Network lists a number of these initiatives. What's different about BACC, and how are you thinking about it moving forward? So what are the next stages to it? And my second question, which may not be appropriate for this panel or not, you can let me know, is how colleges are thinking about BACC with other initiatives that they're already running. So as we all know, we're innovating, we're all trying to solve the problem of completion and success, and there are a lot of independent initiatives going on. Recent research seems to suggest that integration and comprehensive strategies are sort of the direction that we may need to go in order to make a difference. Is BACC being considered a component that would be part of an integrated package, or what's the vision moving forward?
So that's a great question, and I'm going to let Amy Ellen and others comment. I'm just going to note one thing, which is that BACC is ending as a separate initiative, and so one of the questions I'll alert everybody on the panel that I'm going to ask all of them at the end is, what would you say to our foundation funders in the room about what comes next, what builds on this, what doesn't lose this opportunity? And I would love to have ideas from everybody else as well, because I think it is important not to lose it. So that's your what's moving forward question. And I think the ways in which colleges connected it with their other work is one of the most fascinating things, because you're totally right that was, in some colleges, there had been lots of earlier work, like LaGuardia. In other colleges, this was really a starting point, right? So we learned some things about how people connect in very different environments in terms of how much attention they'd had. So I don't know who'd like to start on these questions of how it connects and how colleges connect.
Sure. LaGuardia is a single stop institution. That means that they have single stop as the entity that is connecting students to public benefits on their campus. Other colleges in the initiative had basically did not have that same kind of previous relationship. and built something up from the ground and had financial aid administrators doing the eligibility screening instead of single stop workers or student workers. I'm looking at Skyline, thinking about that. And so it was, in some ways it was, I think it's important to remember that many of these funders are funding Single Stop, or funding SEEDCO, and other folks working in this area to try to connect more students to public benefits. But there was this interest in how do we potentially seed a homegrown approach? How do we seed models that that come out of what that college's culture is, and then take that to scale? So that was an important question right off the bat. The other question you had about and then you'd said, well, what's different about BACC than, let's say, Single Stop? I hope Michael would say that BACC funding helped maybe turbocharge what you were able to do over at LaGuardia, gave you some, you were part of a learning community that exposed you to some different things. You had coaches that had a different take on some things. More cooks in the kitchen can sometimes be a good thing. How it connects to WFSN, is another big initiative, Working Family Success Network, that's going on at 16 colleges across the country. I look because I'm not quite sure if it's that high. 16 colleges across the country. And the idea is that on those campuses, colleges will bundle together services in the workforce development, income supports, and financial stability arena, so to hopefully see better persistence and completion outcomes. And so income supports, benefits access is very much a complementary approach in that area, and lessons that we've learned from BACC are being fed directly into WFSM because many of the same funders are engaged.
So the one other thing I'll say, and then see, I think Michael, Derek may want to comment, is that to me, a couple of the most broad level lessons from BACC are already fed into others, and though there's lots more ways to use them. One is, to me, because I come from the sort of state policy and human services and poverty side, the relationship to the state is really important. And that was an issue that many of the colleges, some of them found better relationships than others, some struggled. And so the idea that you have to have a state level partnership, not just try to do it all on the backs of the individual college, I think is one useful lesson that's being taken forward. Michael?
I would say that there were some benefits that really were important for us at LaGuardia relative to our single stop work that we were doing. What BACC did was enabled us to consolidate some of the public benefits work that was being done. Because at the time, single stop was primarily servicing our credit students, while in our non-credit students, we had some public benefits work kind of being done in certain programs in adult and continuing education. So BACC helped us to think, how do we take these different things that are happening around your campus and really consolidate them? And then the integration of our services. So how do we think about embedding in a different way than we had thought about? I think there was a real benefit of being in this sort of cohort that enabled us to really deeply engage in the learning process. The coaches were spectacular. But the other piece that was extremely important to me when I really wanted us to participate was the ability to use this platform to strengthen the relationship between academic affairs and student affairs around a completion agenda that everyone could understand, which was our ability to really say, if we get our community involved in the process of helping low-income students, which are the overwhelming majority of our students, together we could make it happen. So where Single Stop was seen as an office, public benefits access really became a campaign that was a college-wide initiative so that we all could really come together and see this as an imperative.
There was a lot of focus throughout the work, including the evaluation, on the process of institutional change in a community college. So that was another of the themes. Derek, do you want to add anything? Okay, I'm going to take one more question from the floor, then I'm going to go to one from the web and close with a question to the panelists.
Thank you. My name is Chris Baldwin. I'm with the Michigan Center for Student Success. And my question goes sort of interrelated questions around data. There were questions about how you identify the students. I suspect, I work with the 28 community colleges in Michigan, and I suspect many of them have no idea how many students are even receiving benefits at their institution. So my question is, have you seen in states where longitudinal data systems on the education side are being matched effectively with DHS-related benefits? And I'm specifically thinking about free and reduced lunch and how we could proactively provide that information to institutions, not as a check off on an application or an admissions document, but they'll have the data to know students who are at their institutions that at some point have gotten free and reduced lunch. I mean, it won't give you all the information that you want, but I'm just curious if the panel could speak to those issues.
You're interested in state-level data matches and whether
Correct.
there's been any progress beyond learning that it's hard and what you have to negotiate to do it. Any answers, comments?
There were, sadly, Chris, there were, at least during this period, there was, from an initiative level, there was no real statewide engagement with the longitudinal data systems and leveraging that very large investment nationally to try to get these systems to talk together and work, and they were not utilized perhaps in a way that you suggested could be a good thing. That we didn't observe that during our time, and as I've mentioned already, we found it quite challenging, even in a very small sense, for example, for one benefit like SNAP, to even get those systems to share with one exception, and that was Kentucky.
And I'm going to put on the list of our private philanthropy partners the idea that learning communities among states that try to create the conditions at the state level for effectiveness might include data. Because I would say from my other work with states that one of the problems, again, I'm going to be sympathetic to the state public benefits people. One of the problems big state agencies have in many cases during the recession is that they often attrited whoever were their policy or planning staff. So they'll still have people writing code, and in fact, they're building huge new computer systems. But the ability to think about what would you do, what would it look like, how would it answer your questions, may not be there, and that's a big challenge. So I'm going to build on a question from the web for the panelists as the last question, then I'm going to give them a moment to close. And the question from the web built, I think, on Amy Ellen's point that the stigma of public benefits programs is not just a stigma with the public, it's often how students feel. They often themselves worry about, and Amy Ellen, you highlighted it's a short-run boost for you to give back long-run. But the question here was about how, when you have students who are eligible for benefits but have never used them, what suggestion do you have to get the dialogue going, to inform and encourage without offending the student who feels they've never needed help? And I'm going to add to that, so maybe all four of you will have a thought. How would you get the dialogue going with a student? And if you were in a college or a state where this dialogue had never happened at the institutional level, how would you get it going? Now, maybe I'll just start with Michael and go across.
In our case, we basically had as part of our strategy engaging our marketing communication students to actually do campaigns that would reach from a peer level the kind of information about public benefits, the kind of messaging to help reduce stigma. We also discussed it as as another form of financial aid, and we felt like that was a very important thing to be able to say to students and to really change or redefine the concept of public benefits, to say that we have policemen and firemen, those are public benefits. We have the military, those are public benefits. You have other forms of financial aid, this is another form of financial aid. When you change the conversation and language about public benefits, it allows students to see themselves in a larger way of the various things that they're already taking advantage of. And so it helped us to communicate it using peers, using students, but also using the changes in language. We think that's very important.
Jared, you already gave us the thought of investment as a way of starting the conversation. Anything else you want to add?
Well, you know, I mean, I probably, compared to others on the panel, I kind of deal less with people and more with spreadsheets and all that. So that's the way I want to keep it. But I will say this. I've been involved in this poverty policy work for a long time, and there is and this goes back. I haven't been into this since the 1600s, but this goes back to the 1600s. The idea that the safety net is a hammock, and you hear Paul Ryan has used those words today. Well, I mean, that's never been right. So I've always rejected that reductionist and I think in many cases discriminatory framing. However, here is a crystal clear case where what we're talking about is so not a hammock, right? This is actually, in my view, pro-business, pro-capital. Remember, from an economic perspective, you're trying to create better inputs into a national production function, which is something that is very much pro-growth, pro-business, has nothing to do with any of the hammock kinds of terminology and thinking. So I don't know how you craft the language when you're actually talking to a person on that, but that is the correct interpretation of what's going on here.
I like that a lot. That's something that we have struggled with throughout this initiative is public benefit's a dirty word. It's a dirty word with politicians and our policymakers, but also on the campuses. How do students see themselves vis-a-vis that notion? I also think it's one thing that's been exciting about this initiative is to normalize it. And hopefully for those of you who are staying, I'll put a plug in for the next panel. Our panels this morning are open to the public. Our next panel will be Northampton and Tri-C and LaGuardia, diving in deeper in terms of the nuts and bolts of benefits access. But this idea that this is just another form of financial aid, like Michael said, and then you pair that with there's a time to give and there's a time to receive. This is a short-term thing you're going to do here. You're going to get childcare for your kids. You're going to get some extra food on the table so that you don't have to work as many hours. And then you're going to get to the finish line and you're going to get a good job and you'll be a taxpayer and you won't need any of this anymore. I think that has been one way that people have framed it. Also, framing it as this is for your children. When we think about two-generation approaches, getting that child care funding is essential for you to be able to go to college so that you can get a better job.
Thank you. Do you want to add anything, Derek?
Just briefly, just anecdotally, really, I mean, a number of colleges did use student workers of one kind or another to help their support. But, for example, at Skyline College, many of their student ambassadors actually had been benefit recipients themselves. And I have to say, when we asked them if that was an important criteria for people like them to do the work, they actually said no. But it did seem interesting to me, at least, and to our evaluation team, that a student, a peer, who has been through the process and then being able to talk to someone about that who's not familiar with it just intuitively seems to us to be a positive thing and something that can help break down barriers. But I will have to say in complete candor that those students themselves did not think that was necessary.
Well, let me, just to bring to a close this amazing panel, I'll ask everybody on the panel to think of one next step that you'd like to propose, either for, either for the private philanthropists who are here, or for state policymakers or federal policymakers. And I know there are many more than one next step that everybody would want to say, but just taking on the challenge from the person who asked the question about where does this go next, why don't we hear from each of the panelists one thing that you would take away and have it go next. And what I think I'm going to do, if the panelists will be okay, is do the reverse order we spoke. So starting with Jared, Derek, Michael, Amy Ellen. Can you leave us with an action?
Yeah, I mean, I have two, so I'm
Okay.
sorry.
It's all
Action
right.
inflation. The first is to, and I'm thinking of private philanthropy here. The first is to take off where Derek kind of ended in his initial presentation, which is this idea of, I think of it as kind of a cost-benefit analysis. My sense from where he ended, and we talked a little bit on a planning call, and I think he'll confirm that this is correct, is that it looks like if you followed the beneficiaries of the programs we're talking about, that the net benefits to society would be a big positive, a big plus. And that kind of work, that kind of longitudinal following, cost-benefit analysis, can be powerful and persuasive when, once again, facts become relevant, which may not exactly be where we are right now, but will will be where we are again someday. And then secondly, and again, I think the philanthropic community needs to be helpful here, and it's something that I think many of us and them don't think naturally about, is on the framing issue. I think even in this little panel we've had today, I think we've come up with some important aspects of framing that move you from kind of a hammock mentality to what's really going on here. And I don't think we can just consign that to the media or the advocates or whatever. I think that's a critical piece of this, because we can have everything in place, but if people misunderstand it, we'll never get anywhere.
Thank you. Derek?
I think I'll build on my sort of auto-enroll idea. Perhaps in the changes in the most recent election that occurred in November, I guess this month, we're still in November, that there may be opportunities moving forward around simplified FAFSA, getting down to, 2 questions and boom, you're done kind of thing. So if in fact that's a direction that the federal government is going to go, of asking about income and household size and automatically using those 2 informations to determine Pell eligibility, might we sort of take the next step and ask one more question about being a parent with a child under the age of, 9, and automatically providing benefits for child care and food assistance and anything else that someone at low income would have, so that simplified FAFSA doesn't just give you the Pell Grant, but it would also give you other public benefits to invest in their future.
Sadly, those other public benefits are frequently not available to anybody with those with kids, so that's one of the challenges. Michael?
I think I would say to our philanthropist friends that this past weekend, you may have read a New York Times article about the work that we're doing at LaGuardia in philanthropy. And a couple of weeks prior to that, the story of Vladimir De Jesus, a student who is navigating in a very difficult way to try to complete his dream. Although community colleges enroll more than half or more students than any other sector in higher education, they receive far less philanthropic support than their other not-for-profit peers. I would encourage our philanthropic community to really help community colleges develop the infrastructure that we can improve in our donor bases, because the truth of the matter is we are the sector that does not receive the level of support that we need. And to the extent that you can look at results like the investment made in BACC as a template, we need to continue to extend the kind of supports that community college students receive, community colleges receive, to help their students achieve America's desired end state.
And Ellen, you get the last word.
I think that most importantly, going back to what Michael was saying about philanthropy and community colleges, and I want to put a plug in that all of our community colleges have persisted with their benefits access work, and that was a big goal right off the bat for the funders, was we're going to build sustainable models, because there's a lot of funding that goes on. Once the money goes away, the program goes away, and the program may have been great, but it's not weaved into the life of the institution. And I think if these institutions are serious enough to weave this into the life of their college and change college processes, which is so hard, it's like having a baby. I really do believe that, and I never believed anyone at the beginning of the initiative, now I do. But that then on the other side, if we're going to talk about college completion, our state policies have to then line up behind that and not be incongruent, as so many are right now. Because if we're really serious about equity, if we're really serious about productivity, that means we have to ensure, as Jared said, all the inputs are going in the right direction. And right now, we have a lot of misalignment, unfortunately.
Will you please join me in thanking this terrific panel?